definitely the oldest game I've looked at on this channel. I was gonna be all coy about whether or not I liked it, because I used to not like most retro games, but then I realized what the name of this video would be. I'm Kalice, and I recommend Mega Man 1, or Rockman 1, whichever name you prefer. Mega Man is arguably one of the most famous franchises in gaming, and definitely one of the pillars of classic platformers, along with the likes of Sonic and Mario, as well as one of the foundational classics for Capcom. So, without Mega Man, Capcom might have never gotten to Devil May Cry, and without Devil May Cry, we never would have gotten Platinum. Everything is connected to everything. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Reality is just a series of coincidences, most of which are innocuous, some are tragic, and some are incredibly beautiful. Yeah, I somehow talked about Platinum in a Mega Man 1 video. Sorry, not sorry. Until rather recently, in recent gaming history, Rockman had been almost entirely ignored by Capcom. There was complete silence on any official releases outside of some occasional merchandise. But in more recent years, collections have been coming out regularly, a new mainline entry has been released, and there's been some implications that an X game is on the way as well. Mega Man is getting a lot of love from Capcom again. Yay! Personally, my first Mega Man game was Battle Network 3, which is very different from this game. I was absolutely obsessed with the Battle Network games when I was a little girl, played them over and over and over. They were some of my favorite childhood games, and at some point I branched out to other Mega Man stuff. 04 and X Command missions stick out the most in my mind, but I definitely at least tried out a bunch of other stuff over the years too. When I first tried the classic games, I bounced off of them pretty hard. Maybe I didn't think they held up, or I was a dumb kid, or maybe they were just missing too many features compared to the later games that I had already tried. I don't know, but yeah, that was my perspective going into this. Someone obsessed with the Battle Network games when she was a kid who didn't like the original series when she first tried it. So there's basically nothing directly presented in the first game in terms of story. There's not an opening or explanation of any kind, and the only text you get is at the very end of the game. This is pretty common for the time, especially for early NES stuff, but generally for most games, it's something pretty straightforward that you can intuit. You are a good person trying to stop bad things, probably with violence. In this specific game, there are robots. You are good robot. Stop the evil robots and their evil scientist leader. I hope I didn't lose you in the complexity there. For a bit more on retro games, you can usually look at the manual. A physical copy of that nowadays is probably pretty rare, but a PDF version is only a quick Google search away. However, the English version of the Mega Man 1 manual is questionable, to say the least. There's some details that differ, some are nitpicky, but the big ones are just the slightest bit completely and utterly ridiculous. According to the US manual, the game takes place in a place called Monstropolis. The bosses all control their own empires, and Mega Man is the defender of the universe. It's a complete change in setting and tone from the actual canon version of things. I know it's old, and things like this would happen pretty often back then, but is it really that hard to just translate things properly instead of making random stuff up? Please? Also, I now headcanon that Bad American Box Art Mega Man exists in an alternate universe where all this nonsense is 1000% canon. The Rockman equivalent of Robotech. Okay, yeah, fuck it. The expanded story from Japanese sources is cool. I want people to know about it if they don't. Forgive me if the summary isn't the most accurate. It's based on the wiki and knowledge I picked up over the years from other videos, bits of the comic, and talking with friends. Dr. Light and Dr. Wily are two scientists who make robots. Dr. Light is incredibly good at this, and makes a number of robots that improve life in a wide variety of ways. Eventually, he manages to create a robot with proper artificial intelligence and something resembling free will. The first of these we maybe get to meet in a later game, and he may be super cool, but that's a secret. Shh, don't tell anyone. Rock, who becomes Dr. Light's lab assistant, and Roll, who becomes his housekeeper, are the next robots with proper AI, followed by 6 more who are meant to assist in various fields of industry for both efficiency and safety reasons. Dr. Wily, tired of living in the shadow of Dr. Light, steals those 6 industrial robots and reprograms them to cause chaos. These become the 6 robot masters that you deal with in the game. Dr. Wily decided to not take Rock and Roll because he didn't think they'd be worth the effort. Dr. Light upgrades Rock with armor and a buster arm laser cannon thing, thus Rockman, or Mega Man depending on the region, is born, and he is sent out to deal with this new threat. This actually turns the narrative into something quite tragic. Rock was never built to fight, and now he's killing his brothers, other robots who also have intelligence and at least some degree of free will, who have been changed against their will into killing machines. That depth isn't explored in this particular game, and the finer details don't really come to light outside of supplemental material and other adaptations that came later. I can definitely see some people thinking that this information is out of place in a review, that I should be talking about only what's actually in the game proper, and I definitely get that, but I honestly like the games better because of this narrative that contextualizes what's going on. It affected my perception of this game, so I talked about it here, and it's my channel, so I can do what I want. For the next few games at least, I probably maybe won't talk as much about the story in those games, since their stories boil down to, and then some more robots started causing trouble, and Dr. Wily was probably behind it again, and Mega Man needed to stop them. Over and over and over, but it's the first one, and I really, really like it, so yeah. I should probably give that comic a proper read sometime. As for the actual gameplay, this little cute blue robot boy can jump and shoot. You get different types of shooting, but that's pretty much it for the first game. Things are pretty simple. Also, for the record, I played the PC version on the Legacy Collection. I found the jump to be fine. It feels floaty and kind of loose, whereas I prefer jumps to be more tight and precise. You jump higher the longer you hold the jump button. After acclimating to it, I didn't really have any control problems, and I very much had a fun time with the platforming. I guess I'm just more in favor of the general feel of the later games. Platforming here asks for precision. I found it to generally be harsh, but fair, with only one mechanic that I found to be wholly awful. Two if you count ice physics. The Mega Buster is the only weapon available to you at the start of the game. It fires out a single pip in the direction you're facing. Hardware limits at the time meant you couldn't just hard spam the shot. Only 3 shots can be on the screen at a time. There were hardware limitations for the rate that you could fire them in the original version as well, which you can choose to place onto yourself in the Legacy Collection should you wish. The Legacy Collection also has an additional button that lets you fire all 3 of those pips at once. I use this feature quite often to start, but it's honestly not as large of a help as it might initially seem. They fly so tightly together that the hitbox on those 3 shots isn't particularly large, and at any point that they're on screen, you can't fire any more shots or switch weapons. I often found this to be a hindrance, taking hits that I otherwise could have avoided had I paced out my shots better. The only instance where I found it super useful was when I was dealing with tanky enemies from range that didn't really present much of a threat to me to begin with, so it just wound up being a bit of a time saver. In fact, by the end of the game, when I was using the Mega Buster, I found myself relying on that triple shot rather rarely. Rockman can take multiple hits before dying most of the time. There's a health bar showing how much health you have remaining, bottomless pits and spikes are an instant kill, and when you get hit, you get knocked back a bit, and then get those sweet, sweet invincibility frames, which I found to be super useful. There are 6 initial stages, each themed after one of the 6 Robot Masters, who is the boss you fight at the end of each of those levels. You can play these levels in any order. Getting to choose which level to tackle next is fun. Simple, of course, but compared to other games at the time, something novel. Honestly, very few modern games replicate this specific structure either. There are plenty of open world games, but while those share some similarities, it's not quite the same thing as selecting from specifically crafted levels. I like it, and I want more. Each level has mechanics and enemies that are themed with the boss. Some of these still fall into typical video game conventions. There's an ice and fire level, but others are more unique, like Gutsman's stage that's themed after construction. I enjoyed all of the levels with the exception of Iceman's. It's a combination of the old video game annoyance of ice physics, along with a new, altogether more unique, and wholly awful problem. So, the ice physics make movement slippery, and on Mega Man's sprite, there's no visible indication of how long you'll slide for, you just have to know based on input. As for the new and unique annoyance, there are these moving platforms that are also enemies. As far as I can tell, they move randomly, and I never found a way to control their movement. They can also shoot from their sides, so you have to wait for these platforms to happen to move close enough to each other to jump from one to another, and if you get shot, you'll probably fall into a bottomless pit, because you get knocked back when you're damaged, and the platform you're on is fucking moving, so yeah, probably a bottomless pit. This and an endgame section like it are the only parts of the game where I abuse the Legacy Collection's rewind mechanic, because fuck this garbage. Defeating a Robot Master gives you their weapon. Each Robot Master is weak to another Robot Master's weapon. This list isn't given to you, so I'd give you the same advice my friend gave me. Don't look up a guide for that, just try to logic it out, and if you wind up not having the right weapon and can't beat a specific boss because of that, go try a different level and come back later when you have your next guess. Running out of lives lets you pick between restarting the level and returning to the level select, so yeah, you can just do that. The weapons all function differently. They fire in different ways and are effective in different situations, except for the bomb. The bomb is theoretically effective in certain situations, but it sucks. It takes so long to explode that most enemies that it's effective on can avoid it with ease. All the weapons change what color Mega Man is, which is rather simple but cute. These weapons, unlike the Mega Buster, all take ammo, another bar next to your health. It can be replenished with pickups. Most ammo pickups only fill up whichever weapon you have equipped. I will admit to using the rewind mechanic a few times to fill up the correct weapon when I accidentally picked one up before switching. Also, there are health pickups, which I didn't mention yet, that fill up your health. Video games. It was a lot of fun to try to figure out which option in my arsenal would be most effective in each situation as I progressed. Enemies that were once difficult to deal with were much easier to get past with the right weapon applied in just the right way. Different parts of the game are designed to make each of these weapons useful at different times. Flying enemies are much easier to deal with if you have Cutman's weapon, for example. And the flexibility of being able to shoot vertically with Electman's weapon can eliminate threats before they can even possibly reach you. The weapon from Gutsman's stage can also be used to take certain shortcuts. Normally I wouldn't say exactly how to get this, but you ultimately need it to beat the game. With the weapon from Gutsman and Electman's stage, you can find an additional weapon, the Magnet Beam. Not quite a weapon at all, really, which can be used to create platforms to stand on. Even putting aside the fact that it's a NES game, I quite like the visuals actually. It goes for a rather cutesy and simplistic style. Reminds me a lot of old Western cartoons or Astro Boy. It's colorful, and while the designs are all simple, most I quite like. Except Cutman. Cutman looks super lame. The designs are also generally inspired by tokusatsu stuff, Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, and the like. This is an aesthetic that I absolutely adore, though I don't think it really becomes fully realized until later games, especially in X. I don't think the music absolutely nails it in this entry. I've found most of the tracks to be fine, if somewhat repetitive, only notably annoying when I got stuck on one specific boss. Cutman and Gutsman's themes stood out to me as particularly good though. The Legacy Collection adds some odds and ends. I already talked about the multi-shot button, but in addition to that, you can choose to maintain the normal visual aspect ratio, go full screen or go widescreen, border or no border. You can replicate an old monitor or TV scan lines, or just go with no filter. I, of course, maintained the normal size and used no filter. Pixel perfect, colorful, and clear for me, thanks. And the border was cool, so I used it. There's also a music gallery, art gallery, and database with descriptions for all the sprites in the game. Some of them come with lore, some of them come with tips on how to deal with that enemy. I'd avoid all of these until after finishing the game, spoilers and all that. Well, for what little there is to spoil. Also, the art gallery includes bad American box art Mega Man, so that's either a blessing or a curse depending on your perspective. Both in equal measure if you're like me. There's a challenge mode, but it integrates aspects of the first 6 games, so I'll probably either include that in my video on 6, or make a separate video about them in the future. The rewind feature can be used to absolutely cheese the game. I'm sure some purists are upset about this addition. I say just use it however much you're comfortable with. I usually avoided it, except on that one bit of Iceman stage, instances where I was trying to learn a particular part of a boss I was stuck on, and the very first level I did, Cutman's, because I wanted to test it out and wasn't quite sure how punishing the game would be with game overs and lives yet. The final addition is the ability to save and load wherever you want. You only get a single slot per game, so be careful with that. I use this feature to effectively cancel out the live system. I generally despise live systems in games. I don't like being sent back to the beginning of a level after an arbitrary number of deaths, and I especially don't like when games send you back to the very start, like the fucking title screen, and all of your progress is erased after you die too many times. It feels bad and makes me feel as if I'm wasting my time. Call me a casual, or coddled by modern games if you will, but the point is that I don't find it fun. So in any instance that I can minimize or eliminate that aspect of a game without compromising other aspects of the gameplay, I absolutely will. I'm 1000% down to bash my head against a metaphorical wall for hours on end in terms of a challenging boss or level, but I hate having to play through a significant chunk of something repeatedly to get to the specific bit that I'm actually having trouble with. So yeah, I just saved whenever I respawned at a checkpoint and reloaded whenever I died. Then when I got to a new level, if I had less than 2 lives, I died until I got a game over and then started the process again. It made the experience way more enjoyable to me than it otherwise would have been. I honestly think pretty much every game that can have save states should. Let people customize their gameplay experiences however they want to. The only aspects of the natural checkpoints I had problems with in this game were that there were small areas with a few enemies or obstacles before each boss. The most annoying of these were on a Like Man stage where you have to slowly climb ladders while avoiding electricity hazards. It's slow and it sucks, just let me fight the boss again, fuck. After clearing the initial 6 stages, you gain access to a final gauntlet of levels, Dr. Wily's Castle. The previous levels are designed with any theoretical combination of weapons in mind, whereas these final levels can only be accessed when you have your complete arsenal, with the exception of the magnet beam, which again you need, so make sure to grab that before you get stuck here and have to go back to the level select. The game ramping up the challenge and expecting you to use all the weapons at your disposal to deal with what it throws at you is a really fun feeling. I had never gotten far enough in a classic Mega Man game to get to the endgame before, and I fucking love it. I almost wish that acquiring all the weapons was only like the first half of the game, so that feeling could last for longer. The checkpointing sometimes becomes much less forgiving in these levels, asking you to clear a significant chunk of a level and a boss before reaching another checkpoint or the end of the level. Not exactly ideal as far as I'm concerned. There are boss refights, as well as new bosses in these levels. I don't want to spoil too many of the details, but the hardest part of the game is by far the infamous Yellow Devil. It moves across the screen by breaking into parts that you have to jump out of the way of, and it also has a couple of different shots that it can take at you after doing that. It requires incredibly precise jumps to avoid getting hit by these, like specific jump heights with micro adjustments in the air precise. Those parts move in a specific pattern, so while it asks for a lot of skill to dodge, you can absolutely learn it through repetition. It took me about an hour to actually clear the fight legit. I had fun doing this. If you don't have fun with stuff like that, you can also use a certain exploit to crush it no problem. Honestly, it's a pretty big difficulty spike, even for a game that's already pretty difficult, so I wouldn't blame you for wanting to kind of circumvent this boss. Also, the sprite work for this is amazing for the time and still looks great now. So yeah, Mega Man, Rockman, the Blue Bomber. His first adventure is rough around the edges in some places, but the options presented in the Legacy Collection smoothed out that roughness for me, and made this game a very enjoyable experience. Almost all of the ideas first seen here are expanded on later in the franchise in a whole variety of different ways, but that's for future videos. So very many future videos. For now, I'll just say that I fucking loved this game, far more than I was expecting to, and I can't wait to tackle the next entry. If I'm not being subtle enough, there's more Mega Man videos coming. Like a lot more. So stay tuned. This has been Kalice. You can like the video, subscribe, or share this video around if you enjoyed it and you want to. I recently retooled my Patreon with new rewards like scripts, raw recordings, and your name being written in the credits or read out depending on the tier, so feel free to go look at that. Keep loving what you love, and I'll see you next time with something else.